Most people spend their lives chasing success, but forget to search for the one thing that actually makes life worth living: fulfillment. We wake up, rush through our days, check every box, hit every target, yet something still feels missing. That emptiness isn't failure. It's a signal, a call, a reminder that you are not built to simply survive the days. You were built to feel them. Fulfillment isn't an achievement. It's an alignment. It's when who you are, what you believe, and what you do finally point in the same direction. And the urgency is real, because every day you ignore the call, the gap grows. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to find your way back to yourself. If you want a life that means something, a life that energizes you instead of draining you, then now, not someday, not tomorrow. Now is the moment to start searching for what truly fulfills you. Stop chasing success, because success on its own was never designed to satisfy you. Men are taught from childhood that achievement is the scoreboard of life. Earn more, win more, dominate more, prove more. And while that chase can produce results, it rarely produces meaning. A man can hold the world's applause and still feel empty when he's finally alone with himself. Because deep down, men don't crave trophies, they crave purpose. The truth is that the pressure to succeed often disconnects men from what they actually value. Many are conditioned to believe that vulnerability is weakness, reflection is unnecessary, and feelings are distractions. So they run faster and work harder, hoping that success will drown out the discomfort they refuse to confront. But discomfort isn't the enemy, it's the compass. It reveals what's misaligned, what's missing, what's calling for attention. When a man slows down long enough to hear that message, he discovers that meaning isn't found in the race, it's found in the reason he's running at all. Women, on the other hand, often watch men chase success with a mix of confusion and compassion. They see the exhaustion behind the ambition, the self-doubt behind the confidence, the longing behind the achievements. Many women understand something men aren't always taught. Fulfillment isn't built by proving your value, but by living your values. From their perspective, men aren't wrong for wanting to succeed. They're simply starving for something deeper. And often the people who love men the most are the ones quietly wishing they would stop chasing and start choosing what actually matters. But choosing meaning requires courage of a different kind, the kind that doesn't roar but whispers. The courage to question the life you've built, the courage to acknowledge that success without identity is hollow, the courage to admit that what you're doing looks impressive but doesn't feel important. Men fear these questions because they fear what the answers might require. Not more effort, but more honesty. Not more strength, but more alignment. Not more conquering, but more connection. Meaning begins the moment a man stops performing for the world and starts listening to himself. It begins when he realizes that achievements may raise his status, but alignment raises his spirit. It begins when he stops chasing what looks good on paper and starts building what feels right in his soul. Meaning grows in the choices that reflect who he is, not who the world expects him to be. The women in his life often feel the shift before he does. They notice when he's acting from purpose instead of pressure, when he's present instead of distracted, when he's grounded instead of restless. Because meaning doesn't just transform a man, it transforms how he shows up for others. It deepens his patience, his clarity, his empathy, his leadership. It doesn't make him less of a man. It makes him more of the man he was always meant to be. And meaning builds itself through action, not grand gestures, but authentic ones. A man builds meaning when he chooses work that reflects his beliefs, relationships that reflect his character, habits that reflect his vision, and goals that reflect his truth. Success may impress people, but meaning impacts people, and that impact begins the moment a man decides he's done chasing and ready to start building. The quiet voice inside you isn't weak, because it's the only voice that isn't performing for the world. Every man has that internal whisper, the one that speaks in moments of stillness, the one that surfaces when the noise fades, the one that points towards something true. But most men learn early to ignore it. They're taught to trust volume over clarity, expectations over intuition, productivity over reflection. So they drown out the whisper with hustle, distraction and pressure, convincing themselves that the loudest path must be the strongest one. Yet the voice that speaks softly is the only one that isn't influenced by fear or competition. It doesn't shout because it doesn't have to. Men often mistake silence for uncertainty, but internal quiet is usually a sign of knowing. That inner voice doesn't tell you what you want to hear. It tells you what you need to acknowledge. It nudges you when you're out of alignment. It tightens your chest when you're ignoring something important. It stirs discomfort when you're living in a way that contradicts your values. But because that voice can't be measured or quantified, men tend to dismiss it. They lean on logic to justify decisions that intuition has already rejected. And even when everything looks right on the outside, they feel restless on the inside because the compass they're ignoring never stops pointing. Women see this contradiction in men more clearly than men see it in themselves. They watch men silence their inner voice to meet expectations that were never truly theirs. They see the tension between who a man is and who he thinks he's supposed to be. Many women understand that a man's intuition is not softness, it's direction. It's the map that reveals his truest path. When a man listens to that internal guide, he becomes more grounded, more authentic, more connected. Not because he becomes less masculine, but because he becomes more aware of the kind of man he genuinely wants to be. But listening to that voice demands courage that external achievement can't provide. It takes courage to pause when the world praises your speed. It takes courage to admit that the ladder you're climbing might be leaning against the wrong wall. It takes courage to hear an inner truth that may disrupt the outer identity you've spent years building. Men fear that listening internally might lead to loss of status, approval, stability, yet the real loss comes from ignoring the direction meant specifically for them. The quiet voice doesn't demand change, it invites it. The voice becomes strongest when a man stops needing permission to trust himself. When he stops asking the world to validate what his intuition has already confirmed. When he stops treating his inner knowing as an inconvenience and starts treating it as a guide. A man aligned with his internal voice walks differently, not faster but with direction, not louder but with certainty, not to impress but to express who he truly is. And the women in his life feel that shift instantly because a man who listens to his internal voice shows up with a presence that can't be manufactured. He becomes more intentional, more honest, more emotionally attuned. He communicates with clarity instead of defensiveness, acts with conviction instead of confusion, and chooses with integrity instead of pressure. The quiet voice inside him was never weak. It was simply waiting for him to get quiet enough to hear the map he was meant to follow. If your actions don't match your beliefs, nothing will feel right because the human mind wasn't designed to live in contradiction. Men especially feel this tension in ways they rarely express. They push forward, they perform, they deliver, yet deep down they know when they're acting out of alignment with who they really are. That misalignment creates a subtle discomfort, a heaviness in the chest, a restlessness at night, an irritation that has no clear source. It's not weakness, it's wiring. A man cannot outrun the truth of his own values, no matter how hard he works or how much success he collects along the way. Men often fall into this trap because they're conditioned to prioritize duty over authenticity. They follow the path that looks stable, respectable, or impressive, even when it contradicts what they believe is right for them. Society teaches men to get it done first and question later, but the questioning never goes away. It simply grows louder with time. When a man behaves in ways that contradict what he stands for, it slowly erodes his confidence, his identity, and his energy. He might look strong, capable, and disciplined, but internally he's at war with himself. Women notice this conflict even before men acknowledge it. They see the gap between a man's words and his actions, between his values and his direction, between what he feels and what he allows himself to do. Women often witness how men detach emotionally, not because they don't care, but because living out of alignment drains them. A man who is disconnected from his beliefs becomes disconnected from his presence. He becomes inconsistent without meaning to, frustrated without understanding why, and distant without knowing how to return. From a woman's perspective, his struggle isn't a lack of strength, it's a lack of alignment. Alignment, however, requires honesty, and honesty is where many men hesitate. It requires admitting that something isn't working anymore. It requires facing the discomfort of change. It requires confronting the fear of disappointing others. Men fear that choosing alignment might cost them relationships, opportunities, or stability. But the real cost is living a life that contradicts their internal compass. A man may endure misalignment for years, but eventually the weight becomes too much. His mind grows foggy, his motivation fades, his identity blurs, and the sense that something is off becomes impossible to ignore. A man regains his strength the moment he chooses to act on what he truly believes, even in small ways. When his actions and beliefs line up, everything else becomes clearer. He communicates more directly because he's no longer hiding from himself. He makes decisions faster because he isn't negotiating between truth and expectation. He becomes more grounded because he's operating from conviction rather than pressure. Alignment gives him integrity not just morally, but emotionally and psychologically. And women feel that shift instantly. They feel the steadiness of a man who knows who he is. They feel the calmness of someone no longer fighting an internal battle. They feel the consistency of a man whose actions finally reflect the values he has always carried. When a man aligns his behavior with his beliefs, he becomes someone others can trust, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. When his actions match his beliefs, everything inside him finally feels right. Fulfillment begins where comfort ends, because comfort, by design, keeps you exactly where you are. Men often mistake comfort for stability. The job that feels safe, the routine that feels predictable, the identity that feels familiar, but comfort does not nurture fulfillment. It numbs the desire for it. The moment a man avoids challenge to protect his comfort, he unknowingly shuts the door on the experiences that would have expanded his confidence, his purpose, and his sense of self. Comfort may feel good in the moment, but it quietly starves long-term meaning. Men tend to cling to comfort because stepping into discomfort feels like a threat to their competence. They're raised to believe they must always appear capable, in control, and unshaken. So they avoid situations where they might fail, be judged, or feel exposed. Yet the very discomfort they avoid is the environment where growth actually takes place. Discomfort forces clarity, demands intention, and reveals strengths that comfort will never require. A man's potential doesn't surface when everything is easy. It surfaces when he voluntarily steps into spaces that challenge his identity and stretch his capacity. Women often see this dynamic in men long before men recognize it themselves. They observe the frustration that grows when a man stays in a stagnant environment. They see the spark fade when he stops challenging himself. They sense the heaviness that comes from avoiding risks that would have made him feel alive again. Women understand that a man doesn't lose himself because he's incapable. He loses himself because he stays somewhere he has outgrown. From their perspective, the comfort he protects is the very thing suffocating the fulfillment he secretly craves. But stepping out of comfort requires a level of courage that many men were never taught to cultivate. It demands the willingness to be a beginner again, to not have the answers, to face the possibility of failure. Men fear this because they equate discomfort with inadequacy. They think that not knowing means not being strong enough. But real strength is not proven in comfort. It is revealed in the willingness to enter discomfort with an open mind. Discomfort isn't a signal to retreat. It's the proof that you're stepping into territory that matters. A man begins to feel differently the moment he chooses challenge over familiarity. When he signs up for the difficult conversation he's been avoiding. When he changes the job that no longer aligns. When he leaves the relationship that limits him. When he confronts a pattern he knows is holding him back. Discomfort sharpens his identity because it forces him to show up in ways comfort never demanded. It brings out his resourcefulness, his resilience, his discipline, his creativity, qualities that define who he is, not what he's used to. Women feel the transformation as soon as a man starts embracing discomfort with purpose. They feel the renewed energy in his presence, the clarity in his communication, the confidence in his decisions. A man in growth mode carries a different kind of power, not the power of dominance, but the power of direction. He becomes more intentional, more connected, more alive. And the life he creates from discomfort becomes richer, deeper, and far more fulfilling than anything comfort could have offered. Choose the path that feeds you, because the path that impresses others was never built with your fulfillment in mind. Men are often raised to believe that their worth is measured externally, by status, by income, by titles, by the approval of others. So they choose careers, relationships, and lifestyles that look admirable on the outside but feel empty on the inside. They follow standards they never set, chase goals they never questioned, and sacrifice their inner needs for outer validation. And even when they succeed, they carry a quiet dissatisfaction, wondering why the applause never fills the emptiness they hoped it would. Men fall into this trap because seeking approval is easier than seeking authenticity. Approval has rules, expectations, and a clear path. Authenticity does not. Approval offers immediate rewards, praise, recognition, acceptance. Authenticity demands introspection, discomfort, and courage. Many men choose the path that looks powerful rather than the one that feels meaningful because they fear disappointing the world more than they fear betraying themselves. Yet internal betrayal is the one wound that never heals on its own. It keeps resurfacing as irritability, restlessness, numbness, or that persistent sense that life is happening but not lived. Women see this struggle in men with painful clarity. They watch men carry burdens they don't need to carry, chase outcomes they don't truly desire, and silence dreams they quietly miss. They see how drained a man becomes when his life is built around performance instead of purpose. And they see how alive he becomes when he finally chooses something for himself, not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, but because it aligns with who he actually is. Women often wish men understood that admiration means nothing if it costs them their joy, their identity, and their emotional presence. Choosing the path that feeds you requires a level of honesty that most men avoid. It requires admitting that you don't want what you once convinced yourself you needed. It requires stepping away from expectations that have shaped your choices for years. It requires letting go of the image you've perfected in order to step into the person you truly are. Men fear that choosing for themselves might make them seem selfish or unreliable, but the opposite is true. When a man chooses alignment, he becomes more grounded, more stable, and more deeply connected to his purpose. A man's true strength emerges when he builds a life that nourishes him instead of drains him, when he chooses work that brings meaning rather than status, when he invests in relationships that deepen him rather than validate him, when he pursues goals that reflect his inner compass rather than society's checklist. Every choice that feeds his soul strengthens his character, sharpens his clarity, and restores his sense of direction. A man becomes whole not by impressing the world, but by honoring himself. Women feel this shift instantly because a man who chooses alignment shows up differently, not heavier with pressure, but lighter with clarity. He becomes easier to trust because his actions reflect his truth rather than external expectations. He becomes more emotionally available because he's no longer suppressing his desires in the name of performance. He becomes more confident because his life is built from the inside out, not the outside in. And that kind of confidence, rooted in authenticity rather than approval, becomes the foundation of a life that feeds him long after the applause fades. The life you want is waiting because deep down you already know what it looks like. You've just been postponing the moment you choose it. Men are masters at delaying the decisions that matter most. They tell themselves they'll make a change when things calm down, when responsibilities lighten, when they're more prepared, more confident, more certain. But life doesn't pause while a man gets ready. Days turn into months, Months turn into years, and slowly he realizes that the life he imagined is still sitting on the sidelines, waiting for him to finally step onto the field. Opportunity doesn't disappear overnight. It disappears quietly through hesitation. Men often delay choosing the life they want because the life they have already demands so much of them. Work, expectations, obligations, and pressure stack on their shoulders until there's barely any space left to breathe, let alone rethink everything. They become so busy maintaining the life they've built that they never stop to ask whether it's the life they actually wanted. And even when something feels off, men tend to normalize it. They tell themselves it's just a phase, just stress, just how life is. But the truth is simpler. When a man grows, his life must grow with him. And when it doesn't, everything inside him starts resisting. Women see this inner resistance long before men acknowledge it. They feel the tension between who a man is becoming and the life he's still holding on to. They recognize the frustration that comes from outgrowing a job, a habit, a mindset, or even a version of himself. Women often sense when a man's heart is calling for something bigger, deeper, or more aligned, even when he refuses to speak it. They aren't waiting for him to be perfect. They're waiting for him to be honest enough to admit that the life he settled for is not the life he truly wants. But choosing the life you want requires confronting the fear that keeps you tied to the one you have. Men fear losing stability, losing approval, losing certainty, and losing control. They fear making the wrong move. They fear disappointing others. They fear stepping into a future where nothing is guaranteed. Yet the irony is that the longer a man waits to choose his real life, the more he loses himself in the life he never chose. Avoiding the leap doesn't protect him, it slowly suffocates him. A man begins to reclaim himself the moment he acknowledges what he truly wants without filtering it through fear or expectation. It might be a different career, a different environment, a different pace, or simply a different way of living. It doesn't have to be radical to be real. What matters is that it comes from him. When a man gives himself permission to want what he wants, he experiences a clarity that no external success has ever given him. It's the moment he feels awake again. Women feel the shift immediately when a man begins moving toward the life he wants. They notice the way his energy changes, how he becomes more present, more expressive, more intentional. He communicates with conviction instead of confusion. He makes decisions with purpose instead of pressure. He stands differently because he's standing on something real. And what women appreciate most is that he becomes emotionally available in a way he wasn't before. A man who is aligned with his path is a man who can finally connect, lead, and love with depth. But the life you want won't wait forever because every season has its window. Opportunities don't vanish, they shift, they move, they evolve. The job you dream of today may not exist in 5 years. The city you want to live in may not inspire you the same way later. The person you want to become requires you to act now, not eventually. And the people who believe in you also need to see you believe in yourself before time dulls that hope. The urgency isn't meant to pressure you, it's meant to awaken you. The life you want isn't running away. It's waiting for you to stop hiding behind excuses that sound responsible but feel suffocating. The life you want is calling you to decide, to move, to act, to choose with courage before comfort becomes the cage you cannot escape.